welcome everyone who is here to Kumo Talk Season 2, Episode 1, where we are going to talk all about IP licensing. We have Vince here, and we also have Ralph from Kitty Cones. Calvin, who was initially going to come, couldn't make it because the time zone is our biggest enemy here. But welcome aboard, everyone. And we also have our wonderful new official co-host, Z. I was going to say Nelf. I'm like, Nelf, Z, Nelsig, however he wants to call himself. um, yes, so we have a wonderful guest. And so I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, and then we can move on from there. So, Ralph, I will let you go first, since you're in that.
Oh, hello, everyone. This is Ralph Cosentino. I'm the creator of Kitty Cones. I write and illustrate children's books. I also license a lot of my IPs for product and develop them for entertainment.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ralph. Next up is
Sure.
Vincent.
My name is Vince Parker. I've worked in the film and television industry for 20 plus years now, getting close to 80 film TV credits, both on set and in post production. I have a lot of my experience has been working with producers and directors, and also looking at basically how to help tell the story in visual effects. And but as far as IP licensing, I know a lot of people in the film business, and kind of how a lot of that happens organically in this business. So that's what I'm here to help with.
Awesome. Thank you, Vince. Z, would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name is Z. I'm part of the core team at Random Characters Collective. One of the collections that we most notably launched was Invisible Friends, and with Invisible Friends as well, we went down the path of allowing the holders to commercialize their NFT. So obviously there are some intricacies to it, and I think since we've launched, I've been dealing with a lot of that in the Discord as well, answering questions about that. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm Kumo. Nice to meet you all. I'm the founder and creator of Kumo's World. We are a story-driven project, so there's a lot of IP also involved with our project. And so I think with a lot of projects coming out these days with lores and very distinct creative ideas, I think this IP licensing talk will be very interesting for a lot of NFT projects and people who are in the creative space.
IP itself is very broad, since the two of you are, more familiar with IP in general in the Web2 space. I guess you guys can talk about your experience with IP, and I guess share a little bit about how, you guys feel that IP in Web3, specifically with NFTs, is different to what, you have been working with previously.
I can go ahead and just speak a little bit about my experience. I've sort of dealt with the IP world in a more traditional sense. I started off working for some of the big greeting cards like American Greetings and Hallmark. So I was able to sort of get a glimpse of the IP world through their characters like Strawberry Shortcake, Care Bears, Rainbow Bright, and see how they sort of monetize those IPs, whether through cards, through product, through, entertainment. So I was able to sort of, experience, the idea of how you market and create and exploit those IPs for commercialization and product. So designing Care Bears or Strawberry Shortcake in a ton of unique ways, product ideas, and introducing those into the marketplace. So I've had experience from that end of the IP world. I've also, created characters of my own, and, pitched them to producers, to broadcasters. And I've had things optioned or developed. Like I had one of my cartoons or ideas for a cartoon developed by Cartoon Network. And it was based on a comic book I did and a toy line I created. And a lot of times these ideas can sit, as I'm sure Vince knows, in development hell or purgatory, So it's been sort of an interesting ride for me. Currently, I'm developing some of my characters, but with a completely different sort of set of circumstances with producers, with a showrunner, writers, creating more of a packaged sort of IP or idea or concept or show to pitch to broadcasters. So it's a little bit more put together and thought out. In the NFT space, it's been sort of an interesting ride for me because, it's been relatively new. I saw it as a way to, sort of introduce the characters that I've created in publishing. I've licensed my characters for toys, erasers, and stationery, and T-shirts, Hot Topic, and the NFT space sort of became another avenue to sort of try to get more eyeballs and attention and introduce the world and stories and characters. So that's sort of what I've been focused on is, working to build the brand within this Web3 space.
Yeah, and I think you bring out a lot of good points because I think for a lot of NFT projects as well, the idea of handing over the IP of let's say the art tied to that NFT is typically for for the community to start developing their own ideas around the NFT, to get, like you said, more eyeballs on the project, on the art, and in a very ideal situation, everything sort of gels together, and it sort of compounds your visibility. It's very organic form of marketing, and I think that would typically be the I think the ideal state in which IP gets commercialized, especially from a Web3 project's standpoint, I guess. So yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Vince, I guess, do you have anything to add on to what Ralph mentioned?
Yeah, I think a lot of there's going to be a lot of growing pains, especially in the film business. As far as my experience, I think that NFTs are such a new thing, and the film business moves very slowly. Like you said, you could have your IP in a purgatory, at the mercy of distributors and production companies that are like, oh, we're gonna wait for the right time of market, or oh, our plans have changed because we've decided to push this other thing out because our metrics have shown that that this is going to be more popular, so we're going to move and wait to bring this out next summer or whatever. So it like ends up being something that it's at the mercy of what they feel the market is. So, and then and to add to that, the idea that individuals owning an NFT could have the rights to that particular art um, becomes complicated for places like productions. And it's like, okay, who's in charge and who's going to be, like if we use this one piece of art and license this story around this piece of art that this person owns, is it really do they really have the license for that, and how does it work in the blockchain and giving them an actual contract to own the license and get all that legal stuff done. So I think it's going to take a lot. If you start to pursue the IP licensing of anything, you're going to have to get a lot of legal support, especially if you start getting into bigger production companies that want to license stuff. So it's just something to keep in mind because it's such a weird space of individuals being able to possibly own the IP rights for a specific piece of art that was created by someone who now who has the rights to the overall art style. It's like it gets muddy. So I think there's going to be growing pains. I think before we could really there's any kind of full structure for what it's going to be. It's going to take a year or two before we really see that hammered out and become like a thing where oh, here's this NFT group that like an NFT project that comes out and then ends up getting a show out of it that then people can be involved in because they own the rights to the NFT of a particular character. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think the points you brought up actually tie in very nicely to what I was going to mention next as well, because I think what we've seen, I think just from being on Twitter, you see a lot of projects have varying IP allowances to the holders, right? So you have BAYC where they're kind of like unlimited commercial use of your NFT, and then you have Doodles that allows you to commercialize that image, to up to like $100,000 in commercial revenue, and you have like Invisible Friends where we allow people to use their NFT on an unlimited worldwide royalty-free license in a sense. But at the same time, I think to exemplify your point, we do not allow people to commercialize the individual traits that are on the NFT. So, for example, if it's made up of a top, a hat, some glasses, things like that, they cannot commercialize those specific traits, but they can only use the whole image, in its entirety. So, I think like for people who are listening here, the idea is that there are different types of initial sort of IP allowances that different projects allow you to use, and then from there, obviously, it's always best to speak to a professional.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're doing anything in that sense, I was talking to Ralph a lot about this as well, that it's really important to get a good lawyer to really know what your rights are when you're licensing your IP, because like Vince also mentioned that when you're licensing like to or when individuals have the rights to the IP, but then you have the creator. So that's like my also when I first started, I was really confused because I was like, okay, so I'm the creator of Kumo's world, but then if the individuals have the rights to their Kumo residence, and if I was to make a storybook or an animation from it using those characters, and if we were to do royalties, then it's like, okay, so they have the royalties, but then they sell it on, or they do something with it that what they're doing with the Kumo resident IPs or the characters that they have, and it doesn't really align with Kumo's world, and I'm like, oh well, then do I have a say in like, oh sorry, this is not quite like how our so-called brand is doing things. So I was always kind of just on the cautious side of how people would use your so-called IP, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you guys are talking about. I agree with Vince getting legal counsel to help you properly set up your NFT project is really crucial, because there are so many different ways that folk are allowing the use of their IPs. Whether it's Creative Commons, um, and there's the issue of derivatives and all those issues that you have to sort of cover. So I think you have to, as a creator or artist, know where you want to go with your project, and then get the appropriate legal counsel to protect yourself, and be able to go from there. I mean, you do have, like, you could look, I mean, the way I've been looking at it is that, I'm protecting my brand. It is a brand that I want to license, not just in Web3 space, but I've also been doing it in, the Web2 space, in product and merchandise. So I think that, you have to just know what your goals are, get your legal counsel, and then, protect yourself. You do have the big brands now, like, you have The Walking Dead licensing The Walking Dead, NFTs to, companies that are savvy in this space, right? So they're just collecting a royalty based on the art that they're selling in the NFT space. So, I think as long as you're protecting your world, you can still create NFTs, but just protect your IP and world.
I would agree with you on that too. Good points. Good points. So, like, sorry, Vince, you unmuted. You want to say something?
Yeah, one thing I was going to say, just also in this thing, in this space, if you're building an NFT project and you do plan on, trying to license it out, or even have holders own part of the rights to be able to do stuff with their PFPs, I think, and I've seen a couple projects that early on when I was getting into the NFT space that did this. But my recommendation is not only get legal counsel, but then lay out exactly how you want your licensing structure to be, with your legal counsel, and make sure you get all that written up, and put that up on your site. Like, this is, this is our terms of service, our licensing structure. And then put a TLDR in there too, so that they, of course, can see it, know kind of what the basics are, but you have the whole thing laid out right there for people. I've seen a couple projects. There's one in particular that did this really well. He's an artist that does these like 3D rabbits. It's hoppers, I guess, is the NFT HPPRS. And there are these 3D kind of techno rabbits, and he had on his site has on his site like a full like IP terms. Even has it listed in his fully in his Discord too, laid out as what the rights are, the derivative FAQs, like how how you would register things if you're going to do something really big with his art, and how to get permission to do that stuff. So I think it's really important that if you're looking down the road in the future of what you want to do with your IP, I think to sit down with somebody and really, with really good legal counsel and go through that whole thing, lay it all out, and then let people know how that structure is going to be. Because later, when you go to actually do licensing, it's going to be so much easier because you'll have it already laid out.
Yeah, that's a good point there.
Yeah, and Nikki, you had mentioned something that was interesting to me, talking about, if someone has one of your, NFTs, what can you do with that specific one, because they might have the rights to just that specific art. I have seen some projects, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, where they did have sort of a Creative Commons license where it was sort of everyone owned their own NFTs, but in their legal, they had stated that, I think they created a DAO where collectively as a group they consider how to move forward in licensing or in ancillary sort of business decisions based on that IP. So although some people do create these projects where it's sort of giving everyone the rights to these individual NFTs, some projects are saying, hey, we want to give rights to everyone as a group, as a whole. That way decisions can be made a lot easier than, a ton of individual holders saying, no, I want to do this with my NFT. No, I want to do this with my NFT. So setting something up, just like Vince is sort of saying, making sure what your plans are, the way you want to set up your project collectively is a much, to me, easier, more savvy way to sort of push a brand, yet allow some of that, Web3 space sort of mentality to attach to it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because I mean CCO projects are getting a lot of attention recently as well, and I think it's definitely great for the project and holders, but I think the benefits to it are the benefits for each like stakeholder is quite different, right? Because a lot of the hype around CCO currently, from what I see, is the idea that you own the art, you own the rights, you own unlimited commercial use of the NFT. But obviously, I think there is also a long tail effect, right? Where, as a group, as a collective, the project can decide that, the sort of the formal use case of it, be it through voting through like a DAO or things like that. But I think that's where the doing your own research part comes into play, because just because you're a holder and just because CCO does mean everyone can use the NFT for basically unlimited value, that things can change as well. And I think before aping into a project like that is marketing itself as CCO, you have to understand how CCO can impact your ability to commercialize as well. So it's always a double-edged sword, and I think that's the thing about IP rights. It's that you could be towing the line perfectly, and then one small misstep and everything comes crashing down. It's definitely important to make sure that you ask the right questions to the projects, to see whether they have gotten the correct legal setup, the correct legal speak wording, in terms of how they want to show you that you can license the NFT and things like that. So definitely, as a collector, or as if you're interested in starting a business using the NFT as a logo, or as part of a production, then you have to sort of make sure you double check. So I think when it comes to IP, there are definitely no stupid questions, because it's always better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, for sure. And I think specifically with CCO allowances, you want to retain the integrity of what you've created, right? Your project, your IP. It could take one individual to sort of blow that up, right? So, that's so important. That's so important to just cross your T's and dot your I's and understand where you're headed with it.
Yeah, and exactly, because one bad actor can essentially ruin an entire project's reputation. And if
Yeah.
anything, I think, projects literally only have one shot at it, right? It's kind of hard to recover if you take such a big hit. Let's say someone uses your NFT, in areas like, alcohol. I mean, alcohol, I guess, it kind of like, it depends on who's looking at it, but there are other examples out there, like pornography, for example, obviously is one case where you definitely don't want your project to be strictly associated with. But it could be the case if there are bad actors out there. And obviously these are extreme examples, and why, terms of service, like clearly displayed terms of service is very important, so that, as a project, as a founder, as a creator, you have at least some recourse. But obviously, with Web3 being Web3 and a lot of anonymity in the space, then like it's kind of hard to pull it back in that sense. So that is definitely one of the downside of this form of decentralization. But it's a whole new world, I guess, and adapting is probably the only way forward.
Yeah, I think you guys made a fair point with, giving people the rights. Like the cons obviously is giving people the rights to where it's like free marketing, not free marketing, but free in a way, because if they're proud holders of your PFP, then they're going to want to make use of it, and then it will give your project exposure. But then there are cons, like Z said, with regards to how people use it. So it's really important, like Ralph has said before, and Vince, to know what exactly you want from your project and how to protect yourself from bad actors, because this whole space is so anonymous that you don't know who you might have a bad thing with, that they might want to take down your project. But hopefully not. Hopefully not. We're all friends here.
Exactly. And I guess, in Web 2, where you can, let's say, like serve a cease and desist letter or things like that, in Web 3, you're kind of serving notice to someone, or, a wallet address. You don't know who holds it. You can barely even find out, like where that wallet has been, what has gone through that wallet. And so it's almost impossible to serve that sort of notice. And I think that's the risk that projects will take when you allow your IP to be commercialized. But at the same time, people who then further license it from you, or people who purchase your merchandise, also run the risk of using this IP, like having sort of like merchandise with that IP after you've sold that NFT, something like that. So there will always be inherent risks, I think, and unfortunately, at this point, I don't see any platforms or services that have all encompassed the IP licensing side of things. So now it's kind of like the Wild West. It's kind of fun. It's kind of exciting, but there are a lot of pitfalls, I think.
Risky. Yeah, it's risky, but yes, hopefully it weighs for the better side.
But I guess also a lot of people listening in are probably part of projects that have IP rights to the holders of those NFTs. And I guess Ralph and Vince, from your experience, a lot of questions that I have faced in Discord, or sometimes on Twitter Spaces, is how do you actually license your NFT? So how do you license it out to people, or how do you actually commercialize it? I guess it'd be good if you guys can share more about your experience with everyone.
Do you want me to go first, or Vince?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Traditionally, I've had an agent, right? A representative that is sort of a patron of my work, right? It's sort of like having fans out there. When you want to get into the business of licensing, you want to get out there and make connections with, people in business, right? I used to do, comic book shows, toy fairs, book fairs. And whenever I did those, I would meet, like the buyer at Target, for example. The toy buyer at Target loved one of my character properties. I connected them with my agent, and we worked out like an end cap deal one summer for a whole, ton of toys based on my character. So it's sort of, getting out there, making connections, then having an agent who is going to help you do the same thing a lawyer will do, which is, make sure that you're getting the appropriate royalties domestically, internationally, making sure that, the periods of the contract extend to whenever you want them to, all the details that licensing entails, so getting the right people to support you in that capacity contractually will help those deals come to fruition.
That's kind of similar to what I was going to say, but yeah, you're right. It's really about connecting with people and getting yourself out there. Another thing that I've noticed, at least in the film business, is getting your stuff out there on social media too. Like if you start, like if you're going to do, say, like a small animated cartoon, based on your characters, or that's part of your roadmap was to do a cartoon, um, get put together like a script, a storyboard for your first initial like and a treatment for your overall story arc of what your characters are doing, and the history behind them, the lore, whatever, and build like a animated trailer that you can post up there and start doing little snippets, even if it's like little fun snippets of little characters doing various things, and produce just little pieces over time and get it out there, to get a following, get people talking about your stuff. And it's amazing to me when I'm out on shows and doing stuff, what producers and directors are doing all the time is, hey, have you seen this cool thing here on YouTube? Have you seen this thing on TikTok? They're looking, the new young upcoming people in the industry or look at social media for what they want to do, what they're looking to do next, or ideas, more so than like in the old days with Steven Spielberg and whatnot. It was like books that they've read. Now it's the new thing is like, what have they seen on YouTube? What have they seen on streaming? What have they seen on TikTok and online and on Twitter? Cool art that they've seen. That's where the inspiration is coming from. So the more you can get your stuff out there, people, it's the same as going to like going to like an event, like where you're gonna show off your artwork and people come, like you were saying, come to your, you meet people at these conventions and whatnot. It's That's kind of the new space to do this stuff, and people will come to you. They'll you know uh, start to want to get in contact with you, and then it's about, of course, also finding someone who can help you agent wise, to help navigate some of that stuff. But I think getting your stuff out there is really where if your content's good, there's a need for content. There's a need for this, for new stuff to be out there. So I think it's just a matter of doing that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point because when it comes to the word commercialization, when people see that they have the ability to commercialize their NFT, they think, oh, it's great, I can earn extra money off of holding this, by printing merch or things like that. But even just by printing and selling merch, you're essentially starting, in a sense, a business. And when you start a business, you go down a whole path of, like the whole entrepreneurship journey, right? Like you need to, speak to the target audience through the right mediums. You need to make sure that your supply chain is set up, and then obviously, that's where the lawyers and accountants all will come in, because then it is taxable, for example. Then there are certain limits to what you can do. In the case of doodles, for example, once you cross that $100,000 threshold, then you have to enter a different licensing agreement directly with the company as well. So there are a lot of things to consider when you start to license your, like to use your NFT in any form at all, right? And obviously, I think one of the more successful ones you've seen around on Twitter is probably Bored and Hungry, where someone literally started a fast food chain with their BAYC as the logo, right? So I think I think the glory is always spread around really quickly, but underneath all of that, it's literally you are starting an entire business. There is a process that you have to go through as an entrepreneur as well, and that's in and of itself a whole different journey. And if you think Web3 is time consuming, I think being an entrepreneur is probably 2 times as much, at least.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. But just to going back to a point that that Ralph and Vince mentioned on, like you were saying, like finding agent that will do some of that networking for you and get your story out there because you're starting out. But for those who don't have an agent and that don't really know much about IP and networking or have the contacts, like how would you advise them to go look for these agents? Because obviously the agents are kind of like your spokesperson that would help get you the people that you're interested in working with.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been just connecting with tons of people. I met my agent through a coworker that I worked with at American Greetings, and we've been together for 15 years. So you never know where these connections happen, but what you can do is of course search the web, but search events as well. I think go to some of the more business to business type of places, like License Magazine, Kid Screen. There's a lot of different sites, publications where you can find a lot of help to find agents and representation. But connecting with people in the industry that you also want to get into is going to help too. Whether it's entertainment, whether it's toys, you know. There are agents that represent people for entertainment, for toys, for all kinds of things. So it's just getting out there and making those connections. And Vince hits on something that's so right. I mean, social media, of course, has always been super powerful. And I'm someone that worked more traditionally, where I had my head always buried in writing stories, illustrating my books, working with my agent to reach out to publishers, letting retailers do the marketing. I wasn't really a strong user of social media. I was always sort of with my head down, keeping busy. But I think something like the pandemic to me became like a massive paradigm shift in my life, in a lot of people's lives, where as we're seeing, people are really relying on social media and Web3 and the digital space so much more, to have access to things and to discover things. So it's become such an important facet of what I'm doing now, more so than it was 3 years ago for me. So I think that's a really strong message right there. So that's great. So I'm super excited on how to merge what I've done traditionally in licensing with Web3. That's sort of what's been going through my mind behind the scenes for the past year, and how to sort of work and create a fan base and create product, to keep my IPs sort of out there. So to me, it's really exciting. It does have its pros and cons. It's really some stuff can be pretty scary, where you see your whole collection of NFTs copied by somebody on OpenSea. But I think there's a lot of pluses as well.
That's amazing. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that one. You guys are so wise. um, and just to kind of ask regarding like, licensing. So like once you're talking to, I would say, web two, like for example, you're talking to a broadcaster or something because you want to go into um animation because that's something that I'm guessing yourself and Bint would also be familiar with licensing an IP to a broadcasting company or platform. And so, what are the things that you think would be like to consider when you are going down that route? Because I think when I was talking to you, Ralph, before, you were saying to know whether you'll get, I guess, compensated for the amount of time that they're holding your IP for if they don't actually end up using it, because then you're kind of locked into that sort of contract where you can't use your IP for certain other things, and they have, I guess, um, rights over it for a set time, right?
Yeah, we were specifically discussing selling show, right, based on your character IP.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of cases, you may, as Vince knows, option an idea to a producer, to a broadcaster, And you just have to understand and know, how long do you want them to option it for a year, for 6 months, for whatever that term that they want to develop it is. It could sit and be developed and get greenlit, or it could sit, like I mentioned earlier, in purgatory. So the option deals are just something to be aware of and understand that it could certainly tie you up, if you're trying to grow your brand on your own. Myself personally, my experience, selling and pitching show ideas, brought me to a lot of different conclusions, and some of those have been that, in most instances, when an entertainment company will buy your show idea, they pretty much own the whole thing. They own the IPs. You'll get a small percentage of royalties in merchandise, if that. But what I sort of decided to do later on, after doing that for a few years, was that I wanted to develop my IPs on my own. So that meant growing them by self-producing toys, self-publishing, or just licensing consumer products without having any media support other than publishing. And to me, if I could do that and build a consumer product sort of base for my IP, then when I am ready to sell or pitch to entertainment, I want to see if I can have a little bit of leverage to have a little bit more ownership of my IP, right? So maybe have certain rights for certain channels of distribution. So, the entertainment company may take the rights for mass channels for toys. I'd like to keep specialty channels, web or internet only. So, you can try to negotiate and carve out, those types of things if you have leverage, in some shape or form. And that's what I've tried to do, for the last 4 years or so, is slowly develop my IPs in product, in different platforms, games, and now, of course, the NFT space, to help build it up, and give me a little bit more power.
Yeah, that's very, very, um, very good advice for anyone who is in the space and growing their IP. So thank you.
Yeah, another thing I will mention, because for me, it's a lot of the stuff people I've worked with and whatnot. It a lot of times will build the content first, like actual shows or a film of some kind, and then try to sell it around. As far as as opposed to giving them the IP itself and having someone else develop something out of it. Now it just depends on where, of course that takes more budgeting and more, work on the part of building. But that's kind of the space I'm in. I'm in, film creation. So for me, it's it's just really about, if someone else has to develop the actual, say, like, show, they're of course going to want to have the rights to it, and it's really hard to get your IP out there and say, oh, I'm going to retain all the rights, when you're new. So a lot of times, what has to happen is you kind of have to show, you have to have something that out there to be able to, so people know who you are. Because so, like, if you were to take an IP and you say, okay, this one, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to have someone develop it. They're going to take the rights to it, but I'm going to get royalties based on it. You're going to work that deal out with your agent or your legal team. And you do a project where, yes, Netflix owns it, but you're getting X amount of dollars, either in a big lump sum, or you're getting it as a royalty based thing, and it becomes successful. Once it's successful and you have it under your belt, then you have more negotiating power. You can go in and say, oh, well, look, I had this was a X amount of dollar profitable IP that I developed. Here's my other IP I'm working on, and you have something that you can negotiate with because you have that clout now. So that's happened with a lot of directors and producers in the film business in general. So a lot of your big time director producers, the first couple films they did, the studios took all the money, but they have their name up there to say, okay, I have this successful film under my belt. Then the next time the studio goes, okay, what do you want to do next? Because that made us a lot of money. Then it goes, oh, okay, well now we can sit and talk about how this is something I own, and this is something I'm going to take X amount of dollars for, or this whatever. But it's really about building your brand, building what you have, and building a name for yourself, because you got to be able to prove that you can do what you do first, before you're going to be able to really pull back on how much your IP you're going to be able to control. At least that's my experience in the film business. And that's why a lot of people who get into the independent world, independent film world, will build something first, and if they can get awards and get it out there, then people like Netflix and stuff will go, okay, you have this Sundance winning project, and or that now you have some leverage to say, and it's already built, they don't have to fund it, so you can go out and actually get more for it because you've put more into the development of it. So anyway, that's my take on it. But I think it's just something to think about. You have to kind of build your brand, build who you are to get into that space.
Yeah, I agree with you completely there, Vince, on that, because, like you said, without a so-called clout, and with no one knowing your name or who you are, it's definitely not going to be easy to do any sort of negotiations. And if anything, it's easier for whoever you're selling or licensing the IP to just try and take all the rights from it. Be like, oh well, we'll help you build this, and you'll get better reputation. You'll get exposure, whatever it is. Whereas if you already have like numbers or whatever it is to show, to prove that there is something to build on, if they were to license it, then it's definitely helps with negotiations.
Yeah, I
Um,
totally agree with Vince. I mean,
mhm.
and with you, Nikki. I mean, you have to establish some sort of clout as a creator or artist, to show that you have some sort of track record to give you a little bit more, leverage or exposure and better deals. You definitely have to cut your teeth. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
The whole licensing journey is kind of a long-term thing, right? So, I think you guys really mentioned an important point, which is that it's going to be a give and take relationship. So, choosing the right partners obviously is one thing. I think it's natural to make mistakes in choosing the partners, but when you find the right partner, it is often sort of give and take. There's no situation, I would say, where you can be too greedy at the start, because word of mouth travels fast, and in the future, then no one would want to work with you as well. So yeah, I think definitely, if you are licensing your IP, if you're building a brand out of it as well, then think long term. Think beyond just the instant revenue or the instant gains that you'll get, or the clout. But think about how you're going to really create something that's going to last, because I think that's often where the greatest value is created.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that. It's interesting because like I've created characters through a variety of platforms, comic books and books and toys, but there was always a story behind it, and it's always interesting to see what attracts someone, whether it is the story behind a toy or a comic or a book or whatever it is. And the type of response that you get. So, but creating and developing your story and characters is just so important. Making sure that it resonates. You'll find your voice and it'll attract people. It'll resonate with people.
Amen. Amen. I mean, Ralph, I agree with everything you say. Like, and whenever we have calls, we talk for hours, and I'm like, okay, he is like the Lord of knowledge. So
Oh,
wise,
not
so
really.
wise.
Well, thanks. Not really. There's a great quote by the comic book writer Matt Kint. Um, he said, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he said something like, you know, don't try to do what everyone else is doing. Just be yourself, do your thing, and those fans and those people will find you. Um, so stay true to yourself, and you'll find your audience. And you'll be able to build.
Yeah, I agree with you on that as well. I always say to anyone who's starting the project, but like I mean, it's always easier said than done, right? Stick to your beliefs and don't be swayed otherwise. But then when you're in
Yeah.
the situation, sometimes it's hard to not maybe subconsciously be swayed. Whereas if you were kind of outside looking in, it'd be like, oh, well, why would you do that, you know? But it's
Yeah,
moment.
and I will offer this. I've experienced licensing on so many different levels and platforms, from product development, behind the scenes, style guides, managing IPs for brands, like Warner Brothers or Lucas. So, and on top of that, my own. So I love mentoring and helping and sharing my experiences. So if anyone ever has any questions or wants to discuss an idea, um, honestly, feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to chat and help any way I can.
Ralph is such a pure soul, honestly. He said that at the start we had a call about everything and anything regarding IPs, toys, and anime. He's so experienced in this kind of like in this field. So every like and Vince is in like the film and movie industry. I think sorry, film and movie is the same thing. But in that industry, so you guys have all your own experience that it's really really appreciate you guys sharing your knowledge
Oh,
for listeners.
anytime.
So I guess we don't have anyone requesting to ask questions. It's probably because you guys have answered everything pretty much to anyone who has questions. But I know Vince has to jump off at on the hour because he has work to run to. Whoever is
Thank you
here.
for having me on here. It
No
was a pleasure. It was a
problem.
pleasure meeting you, Vince and Z.
Yeah, yeah, it was great. Thank you so much, Kumo, for inviting me to come along.
Of course. Thank you all for joining. So we will have the next topic next week, which we will post about closest to the date. We all familiar with how we work, but no, we're going to have the topic like a few days beforehand. So until then, I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and Ralph, it was a pleasure, and we should keep in touch.
Yes, I just followed you when we started, so I'm
I followed
excited.
you as well.
Oh, awesome, awesome.
Oh,
Yes, we'd
I
love
love
to chat
it.
for sure.
We're all friends here. We're all friends here. All right. Okay. So I love you all and I leave you all. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too.
All right, bye bye.